March 1945. The sun had barely risen over Tokyo when thousands of Japanese civilians looked toward the sky expecting another day of war. Air raid sirens had become almost as common as church bells had once been in America. People hurried toward shelters. Factory workers tightened their helmets. Soldiers prepared anti-aircraft guns. But something felt different. Far above the clouds, tiny silver dots appeared, not lumbering bombers at first, but sleek, fast fighters moving with astonishing confidence. At first, many Japanese pilots assumed they knew exactly what they were facing. American escort fighters. Nothing unusual. After all, Japanese aviators had spent years fighting aircraft like the P-40 Warhawk and the P-38 Lightning. They respected them, but they also knew their weaknesses. Then they got closer. The aircraft carried long, elegant wings unlike anything Japanese intelligence had fully prepared them for. Its engine produced an unmistakable roar. The speed was unbelievable. And before many Japanese pilots even realized what was happening, their friends were already falling from the sky. The fighter was the American P-51 Mustang. Within months, it would completely change the balance of air power over Japan. For Japanese fighter pilots who had spent years believing they could defend their homeland, the arrival of the Mustang felt less like a new enemy, and more like watching the future arrive overnight. This is the story of how one aircraft shocked an empire, shattered years of confidence, and helped bring the Pacific War toward its dramatic conclusion. Chapter 2. To understand why the P-51 Mustang caused such fear, you have to understand the mindset of Japanese aviation before it appeared over Tokyo. In the early years of World War II, Japan ruled the skies across much of Asia and the Pacific. Their most famous fighter, the Mitsubishi A6M0, had become legendary. It was lightweight, exceptionally maneuverable. It could turn tighter than nearly every Allied aircraft. Its range was extraordinary. American pilots during 1941 and 1942 often underestimated it, and paid with their lives. Stories spread across both sides of the Pacific about mysterious Japanese fighters that seemed capable of impossible turns. Many American pilots entered combat believing they could outmaneuver the Zero. Most quickly learned they could not. Instead, experienced American aviators developed new tactics. Never dogfight. Keep your speed. Attack from above. Dive away. The Zero was deadly, but it also had weaknesses. Its lightweight construction sacrificed armor. Fuel tanks were vulnerable. One burst from heavy machine guns could ignite the aircraft. As the war continued, American industry began producing aircraft in overwhelming numbers. Factories in California, Michigan, and Texas worked around the clock. New pilots arrived every month. New aircraft kept improving. Japan, meanwhile, struggled to replace experienced aviators. Unlike the United States, which rotated combat veterans into training roles, Japan often kept its best pilots at the front until they were killed. Every experienced pilot lost became knowledge that disappeared forever. By 1944, Japan's Air Force still possessed brave men. But bravery could not replace years of combat experience. And then came a challenge nobody in Japan had fully anticipated. The United States introduced an aircraft that combined speed, range, firepower, altitude performance, and reliability into one devastating machine. It wasn't merely another fighter. It represented an entirely new level of aerial warfare. The P-51 Mustang. Ironically, the aircraft had not originally been built for America. The story began with Britain. During 1940, as Europe burned beneath German bombs, British officials desperately searched for more fighters. Instead of waiting years for new production lines, they approached an American manufacturer called North American Aviation. The request seemed simple. Build more Curtiss P-40 fighters under license. But the engineers made an extraordinary proposal. Give us just a little more time, and we'll build something even better. Few people realized that decision would eventually help reshape the skies over Europe, and later Japan itself. Within only 117 days, the first prototype flew. Its streamlined fuselage looked unlike any fighter then in service. Engineers obsessed over aerodynamic efficiency. Smooth surfaces. Laminar flow wings. Reduced drag. Everything about the airplane emphasized speed. Early versions performed well at lower altitudes but lacked power higher in the sky. That changed when engineers installed the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, later built in America by Packard. Suddenly, the Mustang transformed from an excellent airplane into one of history's greatest fighters. It climbed faster, flew farther, reached incredible speeds, and retained outstanding maneuverability. Even more importantly, it could escort heavy bombers farther than any Allied fighter before it. That single capability changed everything. Chapter 3. Before the Mustang arrived in the Pacific, America faced a frustrating problem. The giant B-29 Superfortress represented the most advanced bomber in the world. It could fly higher, carry heavier bomb loads, travel farther than previous bombers. From bases captured in the Mariana Islands, American commanders believed they finally possessed the weapon capable of striking Japan itself. But reaching Japan was only half the battle. Returning safely proved much harder. Long missions stretched thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean. Early B-29 raids often lacked fighter escorts because no available American fighter possessed enough range. Japanese interceptors knew it. Whenever radar stations detected incoming bombers, fighters climbed to intercept. Experienced Japanese pilots attacked head-on. Others struck from behind. Anti-aircraft guns joined the defense. American bomber crews fought back courageously, but losses mounted. General Curtis LeMay understood the problem. Bombers alone could inflict damage. Bombers protected by long-range fighters could dominate the skies. The answer already existed. The P-51 Mustang. The P-51 Mustang. Special long-range versions soon began operating from Iwo Jima after American forces captured the island in one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. The tiny volcanic island suddenly became one of the most strategically valuable places on Earth. From there, Mustangs could escort B-29 bombers directly to Tokyo. For Japanese planners, this development was deeply alarming. Previously, American fighters had appeared only briefly. Now they stayed. They escorted bombers into combat. They hunted interceptors. They attacked airfields. They strafed trains, radar stations, fuel depots, and military installations. Japanese pilots quickly noticed something unsettling. The Mustang rarely seemed to run out of fuel. Even after escorting bombers hundreds of miles, it still possessed enough endurance to chase fighters back toward their own airfields. Some Japanese aviators attempted traditional turning battles. They discovered the Mustang pilots rarely accepted the invitation. Instead, American pilots fought using energy tactics. They attacked from superior altitude, used their tremendous speed, delivered devastating bursts from 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, then climbed away before Japanese fighters could respond. The Mustang wasn't trying to outturn the Zero. It didn't need to. It controlled the engagement. Veteran Japanese pilots later recalled the frustration. Every mistake became fatal. Every loss became harder to replace. American pilots, meanwhile, grew increasingly experienced. Training programs improved. Radio coordination became exceptional. Ground control integrated with bomber formations. The Mustang became more than a fighter. It became part of an enormous system built around overwhelming efficiency. By the spring of 1945, the psychological impact became almost as significant as the physical destruction. Japanese pilots began taking off knowing they might face an aircraft that was faster in level flight, better at high altitude, heavily armed, able to dive away safely, and flown by increasingly well-trained opponents. The skies above Tokyo were no longer contested the way they had been just a few years earlier. For many Japanese aviators, the arrival of the P-51 Mustang marked the moment they realized the balance of air power had shifted beyond recovery. Yet the greatest shock was still to come. Because soon Mustang pilots would stop merely escorting bombers and begin hunting the Japanese Air Force at its source. Chapter 4. The mission briefing room was unusually quiet. American fighter pilots gathered around a large map spread across a wooden table. Red circles marked Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and dozens of military airfields scattered across the Japanese mainland. For years, escorting bombers had been the primary objective. Stay with the B-29s. Protect the formation. Drive away enemy fighters. Then return home. Now the orders had changed. If enemy aircraft retreated, follow them. If Japanese fighters landed, attack the airfields. Destroy airplanes before they could ever take off again. For the first time, the war was coming directly to the Japanese homeland, not just through bombing, but through relentless fighter sweeps that left almost nowhere safe. As hundreds of P-51 Mustangs crossed the coastline, Japanese radar operators immediately recognized the danger. Telephone lines lit up. Warning sirens echoed across military bases. Ground crews rushed toward aircraft. Pilots sprinted across concrete runways, pulling on helmets while mechanics spun propellers by hand to speed engine starts. Every second mattered, because the Mustangs were already overhead. Instead of circling high above, many American fighters descended at incredible speed. The attack came without hesitation. Machine guns erupted. 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns fired nearly 75 rounds every second from a single Mustang. To anyone standing below, it sounded less like gunfire and more like a giant sheet of tearing metal. Rows of parked fighters exploded into flames. Fuel trucks ignited. Ammunition dumps detonated. Hangars collapsed under streams of armor-piercing bullets. Pilots who had managed to start their engines found themselves trapped. Taxiways became killing zones. A fighter moving slowly across an airfield had almost no chance against an enemy diving at over 400 miles per hour. Many Japanese aviators later described the attacks as chaos beyond anything they had previously experienced. One moment they believed they had enough time to scramble. The next, bullets were ripping across the runway. Smoke covered everything. Visibility disappeared. Explosions echoed from every direction. Even experienced veterans struggled to understand how American fighters had reached them so quickly. The psychological effect was enormous. Airfields that once represented safety had become targets themselves. No place felt secure anymore. Chapter 5. In aerial combat, confidence is often just as important as skill. For much of the Pacific War, Japanese fighter pilots had entered battle believing they possessed some of the finest aircraft in the world. That confidence had carried them through countless victories during the early years of the conflict. But confidence can disappear surprisingly fast, especially when every encounter seems to confirm that your opponent holds every advantage. The P-51 Mustang wasn't invincible. American pilots still made mistakes. Mechanical failures still happened. Combat remained dangerous. But compared with many Japanese fighters in 1945, the Mustang represented a different generation of aviation technology. Its Packard-built Merlin engine gave it exceptional performance at high altitude. Its bubble canopy offered outstanding visibility. Its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy lighter aircraft. Its long range meant American commanders could plan missions previously considered impossible. Japanese pilots noticed something else. The Americans rarely appeared tired. Mission after mission, new formations arrived. Fresh aircraft. Fresh crews. Fresh escorts. Behind every Mustang stood the industrial power of the United States. Factories produced airplanes faster than Japan could replace losses. Training schools graduated thousands of new pilots. Fuel supplies remained plentiful. Replacement parts arrived continuously. Japan faced the opposite reality. Oil shortages reduced flight training. Replacement engines became scarce. Many young pilots entered combat with only a fraction of the flight hours earlier generations had received. Some had never fired their guns in realistic aerial exercises before facing experienced American veterans. The results became tragically predictable. One surviving Japanese officer later reflected that by 1945, they were sending courageous young men into battles they had almost no realistic chance of winning. Many knew it. Their commanders knew it. Yet they flew anyway. That determination impressed even their American opponents. Mustang pilots frequently described Japanese aviators as fearless. Even when outnumbered. Even when flying obsolete aircraft. Even when fuel shortages limited their options. They continued climbing toward incoming bombers. Again and again. Sometimes they succeeded in damaging American aircraft. But increasingly they paid with their lives. The skies above Japan had become a contest not simply between pilots, but between entire industrial systems. One nation could replace almost everything it lost. The other could not. Chapter 6. As American fighter sweeps intensified, Japanese commanders searched desperately for solutions. New tactics were introduced. Pilots were instructed to attack bombers head-on. Some units attempted coordinated assaults from multiple directions. Others tried climbing above incoming formations before diving through them. Occasionally these tactics worked, but every successful attack triggered an immediate response from the Mustangs. American escort fighters rarely chased recklessly. Instead, they operated with remarkable discipline. Wingmen protected one another. Radio communication remained constant. Altitude advantages were carefully maintained. The moment a Japanese fighter committed to attacking a bomber, one or more Mustangs often appeared behind it. Veteran American pilots referred to this as protecting the bomber's back door. Many Japanese aviators never even saw the aircraft that shot them down. The speed of the Mustang made surprise attacks devastatingly effective. Fire. Climb. Repeat. Some Japanese units attempted to lure Mustangs into low-speed turning fights. Occasionally an inexperienced American pilot accepted. But combat veterans knew better. The Mustang excelled by maintaining energy. High speed meant survival. Altitude meant options. The aircraft allowed its pilot to choose when to fight and when to leave. That freedom changed everything. By mid-1945, Japanese intelligence reports painted a grim picture. American fighters were appearing almost everywhere, not only over Tokyo, but across industrial centers, transportation networks, military airfields, and coastal regions. Even trains carrying military supplies became targets. Locomotives were strafed. Bridges were attacked. Shipping near the coast came under repeated assault. Every successful mission further weakened Japan's ability to continue the war. Yet perhaps the greatest impact wasn't measured in destroyed aircraft or damaged factories. It was measured in morale. Japanese civilians watched American fighters fly over their cities in broad daylight. Soldiers saw enemy aircraft operating with increasing confidence. Pilots realized they were fighting an opponent that seemed impossible to keep away. For the first time, many began to understand that Japan no longer controlled its own skies. And once a nation loses command of the air, everything on the ground becomes vulnerable. The P-51 Mustang had not won the Pacific War by itself. No single aircraft could. But it had become one of the most powerful symbols of America's growing air superiority. The balance had shifted. The momentum was irreversible. And the final months of the war would prove just how decisive that shift had become. Chapter 7. By the summer of 1945, the skies over Japan had changed beyond recognition. Just 4 years earlier, Japanese fighter pilots had launched surprise attacks across the Pacific with remarkable confidence. Aircraft like the Zero had become symbols of an empire that seemed unstoppable. Now that confidence had vanished. Every morning began the same way. Radar stations scanned the horizon. Observers climbed watchtowers with binoculars. Anti-aircraft crews stood beside their guns. Airfields remained on constant alert. The question was no longer if American aircraft would appear. The only question was when. And increasingly, the first aircraft visible in the distance were not bombers. They were Mustangs. Long before the B-29s reached their targets, the P-51s swept ahead of the formations, searching the skies for Japanese fighters. They climbed above cloud layers, patrolled likely interception routes, and hunted anything capable of threatening the bombers. For Japanese pilots, this created an impossible dilemma. Take off early and they risked being intercepted before reaching altitude. Wait too long and the bombers would already be over their targets. Many squadrons found themselves caught in between. Pilots barely had time to retract their landing gear before American fighters attacked. Others never even became airborne. American intelligence had become remarkably effective. Reconnaissance photographs identified operational airfields. Radio intercepts revealed activity. Returning bomber crews reported aircraft concentrations. The next mission often included Mustang sweeps aimed directly at those locations. The attacks became almost routine. A group of Mustangs would arrive at high altitude. Another section remained above as cover. The rest dove toward the airfield. Engines screamed. Machine guns thundered. Concrete shattered beneath streams of .50 caliber bullets. Rows of parked aircraft burst into flames. Fuel tanks exploded with towering columns of black smoke. Within minutes, an entire base could be rendered temporarily unusable. American pilots referred to these missions as fighter sweeps. To the Japanese personnel on the ground, they felt more like sudden storms, violent, unpredictable, and devastating. One Japanese mechanic later described seeing Mustangs appear so quickly that he initially believed they were friendly aircraft returning from patrol. Only when bullets began striking the runway did everyone realize the truth. Panic spread instantly. Ground crews abandoned equipment. Pilots scrambled for cover beneath revetments. Some desperately tried to save aircraft by taxiing them away from burning hangars. Others simply watched helplessly as years of work disappeared in minutes. The Mustang had become far more than an escort fighter. It had become an offensive weapon capable of paralyzing Japan's remaining air power before battles even began. Chapter 8. Despite overwhelming odds, Japanese pilots continued to fly. Many were young men barely out of flight school. Some had less than 100 hours in military aircraft. Others were veterans who had survived years of combat stretching back to China or the early Pacific campaigns. Together, they faced one of the most experienced air forces the world had ever seen. American pilots arriving over Japan in 1945 often carried hundreds of combat hours. Many had already fought in Europe or across the Pacific. Training standards had improved dramatically since the early years of the war. Formation flying became second nature. Radio discipline was excellent. Gunnery accuracy improved through constant practice. The difference showed in combat. Mustang pilots rarely wasted ammunition. Instead of spraying bullets wildly, they closed the distance before firing short, controlled bursts. Those 6 Browning machine guns delivered incredible destructive power. Against lightly armored Japanese fighters, even a brief burst could prove fatal. Still, American veterans respected their opponents. Many later recalled the determination displayed by Japanese aviators. Even when hopelessly outmatched. Even when fuel shortages limited flight time. Even when newer American aircraft dominated nearly every performance category, Japanese pilots continued climbing into battle. Some attacks bordered on suicidal. Others demonstrated extraordinary flying skill. Several American aces admitted that underestimating a Japanese pilot remained dangerous until the very end of the war. Courage, however, could not overcome mathematics. The United States possessed overwhelming industrial capacity. American factories produced aircraft by the thousands. Replacement engines arrived continuously. Damaged Mustangs were repaired and returned to service with astonishing speed. Japan struggled simply to keep existing aircraft operational. Fuel became increasingly scarce. Spare parts disappeared. Entire squadrons sat grounded because engines could not be repaired. Experienced instructors had already been lost in previous campaigns. Young pilots often learned from manuals rather than seasoned veterans. Each loss made the next generation weaker. The imbalance grew larger every month. By July 1945, American aircraft roamed Japanese skies with a confidence unimaginable only a few years earlier. The Mustang had become one of the clearest symbols of that transformation. It represented more than speed, more than firepower, more than engineering. It represented an industrial nation capable of projecting overwhelming air power across an entire ocean. For Japanese commanders watching from underground headquarters, the conclusion became increasingly unavoidable. The homeland could no longer be defended in the air. Chapter 9. History often remembers wars through famous battles. Pearl Harbor, Midway, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. But sometimes history changes because of a machine. The P-51 Mustang was one of those machines. It did not win World War II alone. Thousands of bombers, ships, tanks, soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, factory workers, engineers, nurses, and civilians all contributed to the Allied victory. Yet the Mustang solved one of the greatest problems facing American air strategy. It allowed bombers to travel farther than ever before while remaining protected. It gave American commanders the freedom to strike targets once considered unreachable. And over Japan, it gradually removed the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy Air Forces from the skies. For the Japanese pilots who encountered it over Tokyo, the Mustang was shocking because it challenged everything they had relied upon. It climbed quickly. It flew faster. It carried heavy armament. It possessed remarkable range. Most importantly, it was flown within a highly organized system that emphasized teamwork over individual heroics. Many surviving Japanese veterans later spoke with respect about the aircraft. Not admiration for the destruction it caused, but recognition of its extraordinary capabilities. American veterans expressed similar respect toward the Japanese pilots they fought. They understood that many of their opponents continued flying despite impossible circumstances. In the end, courage existed on both sides. Technology mattered. Training mattered. Industry mattered. Leadership mattered. And together, those factors determined the outcome. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, the sound of combat over Tokyo finally faded. The skies that had once echoed with Merlin engines, anti-aircraft fire, and desperate dogfights slowly became quiet again. Today, beautifully restored P-51 Mustangs still fly at airshows across the United States. Their polished aluminum reflects sunlight instead of tracer rounds. Crowds gather to hear the unmistakable roar of the Merlin engine, not as a warning of war but as a tribute to history. Each flight serves as a reminder of the extraordinary men who flew them. Young Americans who crossed the Pacific knowing they might never return. Young Japanese pilots who climbed into the sky despite overwhelming odds. Many never came home. Their stories remain written not only in history books, but in the silence left behind after the fighting ended. The skies over Tokyo witnessed one of the greatest shifts in aerial warfare ever seen. For Japanese pilots, the arrival of America's P-51 Mustang was more than the appearance of a new fighter. It marked the moment they realized the balance of air power had changed forever. And that moment became one of the defining chapters in the history of World War II. The roar of the Mustang has faded into history, but its legacy, and the courage of those who faced each other in the skies above Japan, continues to remind us that technological innovation can shape wars, while human sacrifice defines their cost. Narrator asterisk. As the smoke cleared over Tokyo, one thing became undeniable. The arrival of America's P-51 Mustang had forever changed the balance of air power in the Pacific. It wasn't just an aircraft, it was a symbol of innovation, determination, and the rapidly changing nature of modern warfare. But behind every dogfight and every mission were real people. Young pilots on both sides who climbed into the sky, knowing each flight could be their last. Their courage, sacrifice, and stories continue to remind us of the true human cost of war. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to see more in-depth stories about World War II legendary battles, military technology, and the untold moments that shaped history, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new documentary. If this video taught you something new, leave a like and let us know in the comments. Which World War II aircraft do you think changed history the most? The P-51 Mustang, the Spitfire, the Zero, or another legendary fighter? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next documentary.